Hi, and welcome to this SSP virtual library webinar on expanding the research lifecycle. I'm Will Schweitzer. I'm Chief Product Officer at Silverchair, and I'm joined today by a panel of three others, including Sami Venchakram, the co-founder and CEO of Morcier, Michelle Avasar-Whiting, Operations Director for Research Square, excuse me, and Josh Nicholson, co-founder and CEO of Cite. In our discussion today, each one of our panelists will give a 15-minute presentation followed by group discussion. Our topic is the researcher workflow. And while the research workflow has never been linear, research artifacts along with the publication process often give that presentation. So what are these companies doing? How are they supporting authors and engaging end users? Do they represent an evolution or a revolution in research and scholarly communication? We're going to start with Sami today. So Sami.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. All right, do you see my screen? Yes, I hope so. Yes. So, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also for the kind invitation to share with you a couple of elements that are close to my heart. So very briefly, as I only have a limited amount of time, and I'm have a lot of content in my presentation. So I'm Sami. I'm one of the co-founders of Morcier and the managing director. And everything that we do is around what we call early stage research. So posters, presentations that are presented at conferences, everything basically before the published article. The work that we're doing is really around conferences, virtual conferences, hybrid conferences, and so on. And the question that we basically always always ask ourselves is how do scholars actually look for current and really the focus is on current scientific information. In the following pictures that I'm going to show you seem to be really from a different age, but essentially in-person meetings, when they still happened, the vast majority of them looked a little bit like that. So you have traditional scientific posters, which are a wonderful way to summarize current milestones, to showcase preliminary results, and it's worldwide a standard to show it in all different formats. But the huge problem in posters and presentation, and if we do quickly the math, on a typical 3 to 5 day conference, you would see a limited amount of posters and presentation, and unfortunately, it's really not disseminated in a proper way. So only if you actually go to physically to a conference and consume a poster or sit in one of the keynote halls and really exchange interact on the conference, you actually are able to see all the documents. And this is how we like to show and like to showcase basically the scientific process, right? You have an idea in the very beginning, and then in the end the ultimate goal is to have a preprint or a publication. And the world that we are focusing on, so the first 2, 3, sometimes even 4 or 5 years, are unfortunately hard to access, right? So for a lot of researchers in the world, they are they're tough to get access to. So then suddenly a couple of months ago, this problem happened, right? It got even worse because most of conferences around the world got cancelled, and that way of scholarly exchange, this element of taking a poster, putting that on a wall, taking a USB key, presenting a keynote, suddenly seemed to be impossible to actually do, and there's some sort of a new process of thinking that started. So this graph that I showed earlier with that hidden element got even darker, and we are basically now in this stage where we have access to preprints and publications, but the very early stages, all these early ideas, all of these important elements where you really need to iterate on, is even tougher to get access to. And just to remind ourselves about the importance of conferences and workshops. So you're most probably all familiar with that study that showcases that scholars, to keep up attending conferences or workshops is really one of the number one, or the number one way to do so. So accessing scholarly content upstream is extremely difficult for researchers, and I think that it actually did become even more difficult with all the current dynamics. So let me talk a little bit about why I believe it's absolutely necessary that we all focus on these early bits, and the reasons are the three, and there is a fourth problem. So we generally, to consume, or and to go to all of these conferences takes a lot of time. So researchers have a very little time. There's limited funds also to travel to the conferences, and then there's two more elements. So one is the unstructured content element. So really that element of posters and presentation that would have been presented on conferences. They, for example, do not get a DOI so far. They are not really, they do not get a metadata structure, and they are not integrated in the classical dissemination tools that you would find in scholarly communication. And now there is a fourth element that came to it, which is really that uncertainty around the future of that exchange that would usually happen on conferences. So the discussions that we are having at Morassier is how can we, what is the future? Is it a hybrid? Is it a blended element? Is really that uncertainty. And with all our experience, we like to have these discussions, but it's not very clear where this is all going. So again, what is early stage research, and why is it so incredibly important? In our view, there's basically these two ways of scholarly output. There's the classical output, which is posters, presentations, and preprints and publication, which is basically the summary of my research, and then you have the underlying data. And in our dream case, in where we are basically steering everything, and where we are basically encouraging everybody to join us on this mission, is to be able to connect the pieces, right? How great would it be to connect from the first idea to the final presentation, right? So again, so far it's hidden, but let's work on it to actually unhide, and to discover all of that wealth of knowledge that is under this tip of iceberg that we can see currently. So just to give you a couple of insights on how that might look like. So this is a poster, and you see in a poster in a digital format. So in this type, you see on the right bottom that there is a DOI link. You can really embed these types of elements in the scholarly into the scholarly ecosystem, and there's a lot of interesting elements like DOIs that are hidden on the posters, funding information that are hidden on the posters. So there's a lot of interesting insights that we can take out of the posters and presentation, or have the poster together with the video, so enriched formats. So once we actually take them out of the typical, analog, offline, in-person meeting into the digital realm, there's so much that we can do around it. Initiate a conversation around these documents in order to bring that type of scientific exchange further. So just to summarize, three elements that we believe are very important. This whole dynamic around cancelled in-person conferences require a complete new idea and somewhat of a reinvention in order to preserve that exchange that would usually and typically happen on scientific conference. And also when we look into the future, there will be some sort of connection with digital world and in person. So we really need to reinvent ourselves there. The second element, and I mentioned that briefly, is we strongly believe that when we will be able to trace from the very first idea to the finally published article, when we are able to actually link all the content, we will be able to accelerate breakthroughs, because mistakes are being showcased a little bit earlier. We can reproduce much earlier, and the exchange around these early results can be accelerated as well. And the third element is, I strongly also believe that societies and institutions create a lot of value around these early signals. Just imagine if you're members of the members of societies and institutions, can see early signals, can see early ideas, can get in contact with researchers much earlier in the value chain, and also create new revenue streams around that new type of content. So again, my last slide, these three elements: we need a reimagination of this scholarly exchange that would happen typically on conference on this early stage research. Second, there's a need to really link the content pieces to one another, and that creates transparency and traceability. And the third element, we strongly believe that this creates much more value, but also new revenue streams in our world. So thank you very much, and yeah, I look forward to having a discussion later on. So
great. And
screen share.
Up next is Michelle from Research Square. Michelle, do you want to share your camera while you're presenting?
Sorry about that. You able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Hi, so I'm Michelle Abasar-Whiting. I'm the Operations Director at Research Square. And I'm here to talk to you today about an initiative that we started, a service that we started called InReview. And this is about a 20-month-old initiative at this point. It was really designed to seamlessly build preprinting and other author-friendly features into an existing journal publishing system. And this is sort of an attempt to solve some long-standing author frustrations and help move the industry, publishing industry, into this new, more open world. And just to give you a little context here, Research Square is the name of our company and also the name of the preprint platform, which is about 18 months old at this point, of the same name. And the company AJE is also under Research Square, and this is a language service and manuscript service company that is now 15 years old. So you should know that I have a special interest in you enjoying this presentation because I'm an employee at Research Square. So I just felt like I should disclose that. So preprints are really having a moment right now. I'm sure most of the people listening to this presentation will already be familiar with this, but what is a preprint? It's a full scientific manuscript that is posted before traditional journal publishing. And this has been part of the culture for math and physics for a really long time, probably since the early 90s with arXiv, but it hasn't had nearly the same level of popularity in the life sciences or the medical sciences for several reasons that I won't get into right now. But anyway, this does seem to be changing, and especially over the last few years. This is a cool chart that I've taken from ASAP Bio Group, showing the sort of rise of preprints, especially in the last 7 years or so. It's largely driven by bioRxiv, of course, in the life sciences, but more recently you can see that there's been some diversification in this space, including our company. And I'd be remiss not to mention the impact that COVID has had on preprinting. This bottom chart here is taken from a very nice paper that was recently published or posted in bioRxiv, showing really that preprints are kind of keeping pace with journal articles, or have been certainly in the early days of the pandemic. And a lot of the research that ultimately is published in journal articles was originally pre-printed. So this has had a really interesting effect on the preprint landscape, and sort of seemed to usher in new appreciation for the need to share results early among clinical scientists in particular. So InReview is a service that was custom engineered by Research Square, essentially to work with a journal's existing submission and manuscript tracking system. And it's a free opt-in based system whose basic value proposition is around early feedback, earlier citations, and an earlier claim to the findings being presented. So, and it also provides more insight for authors, which I'll get into later, on the specific editorial status of their paper, and gives them access to tools and services and information that serves to improve their paper ultimately. So how does it work? Over here on the right, you can see the basic workflow. A person submits to a journal, and they're given an explanation of what the service is and an option to opt in. And then once they pass a basic journal QC process, the data is brought into our system, and the paper is converted to HTML in a partially automated process. It goes through some sense checks to make sure that there are no ethical concerns or concerns with the content, publishing that content early, and then the preprint is posted. And of course, the two sides of this diagram are not temporally equal, and it's not it doesn't paint the full picture. Of course, many papers are not ultimately published that are submitted, and a preprint will always go up before the paper is published, and usually before it even goes out to review. So that's an important thing to keep in mind looking at that. So preprints have sort of always been very no frills, and I think that this has been by design, meant to convey the work in progress kind of nature of the document. And in building our platform, we tried really hard not to make it pretty, but it just kept happening. So at some point we just gave up on that and stopped fighting it. But really, it's not just a pretty interface. Everything here is form following function, and I'm just going to give you a quick tour of what that looks like. So at the top of an InReview preprint, you can see a clear notation that the paper is part of the InReview environment as opposed to being just broadly associated with the Research Square platform. There is a clear imprint of the journal or journal group that the paper is associated with, a link to the published article if it's already been published, and actually that appears in several places on the preprint, so that that there is a clear visible indication that you're not looking at the version of record. There is a disclaimer at the top of every preprint now, and author list, a full author list, which on toggle gives you affiliation information and contact information for the authors. Each preprint and its versions have a unique DOI, and they're licensed under a Creative Commons license. And when you arrive at an InReview preprint, you'll notice that the abstract and any associated visuals are expanded by default. And this is, again, form following function. We want there to be all the most important information to be visible right up front when you arrive at the preprint. And just a quick plug here that this is one thing that COVID has really accentuated for us, is just the importance of giving as much information up front as we can provide in terms of lay audience explanations, visuals that explain things in a clear and accessible manner to anyone who might be arriving. This is especially important now that this sort of content is accessible to anyone and has been accessed by lots of people who don't have a scientific background, and as it should be. And so on the right side of the preprints, there are various sharing options. There is a section for badges, which I'll get into a little bit later. But just suffice it to say that every preprint that ends up getting posted has to pass some sort of screen. And so we'll get by default this pre-screen badge to indicate that it's passed that screen. There's a peer review timeline, and this is a very important feature of most of our InReview papers, but it will have varying levels of information depending on the journal's specifications. It also displays metrics, including comments and views and PDF downloads, as well as an alt metric and dimensions badge that upon clicking you can get more information from. And on the previous slide, I showed you an example of a preprint that didn't have a very robust peer review timeline, but this is maybe the opposite end of the spectrum, where you can see just sort of the level of granularity that you might see in a very dynamic editorial process. And this is visible to both authors and any reader that happens upon the preprint. And it might span multiple versions of the preprint as well. And this is another feature that, like many of the features that I've mentioned so far, are not unique to our preprint platform, but I still think it's non-trivial and worth mentioning, not just because of the amount of work that goes into actually making this happen in any kind of, with any level of fidelity, but also because of how important it is. And I think and this is full text HTML rendering that happens, that occurs for any docx that is uploaded to our system or brought in through a manuscript tracking system. And I think this is important because it allows the preprint to be fully searchable. It makes the preprint more discoverable, and something that people don't think about very often, but it allows it to be translated in place into any language that Google will translate into. And this is obviously an important feature for making content accessible globally. So I've been talking mostly about features that are equally accessible to both readers and authors, but it's important to mention that the InReview service also includes an author dashboard that might feature information that isn't surfaced publicly, and that would entail a different level of granularity on a peer review timeline, more information, and could include the actual review content as well as the reviews come in. Also, authors have the option to purchase or access tools, and so right now this includes editing, of course, because that is the bread and butter of our company, as well as badges, as of very recently, and other multimedia research promotion type content that they can access and get tailor-made for their study. So I mentioned this is an 18-month-old or 20-month-old project at this point, and this is to give you a sense of where we are now. We started with only a small handful of Springer Nature journals, and now we have rolled out to 292 journals with a bizarrely stable average opt-in rate of 36%. It's sort of stuck at that level for the better part of a year now. We have over 28,000 preprints on the platform, and most of these are at this point clinical medicine preprints. So you can see this also reflected in the relatively high opt-in rates among journals, which are in panel C here. This is again reflecting this disproportionate interest in preprinting among clinical scientists. And indeed, you can see a country breakdown, which is really just commensurate with the proportion of authors submitting to those journals from those countries. And then there's Twitter. Everyone here probably knows that Twitter has become a very popular medium for scientists in the last 10 years or so. And it's one of the most common ways that authors choose to share preprints as well. So roughly 4%, it's not very many, but roughly 4% of InReview authors share their preprints on social media, mostly Twitter. And this behavior happens all over the world, though it certainly is not evenly distributed, especially between the global north and south, despite the fact that a non-trivial amount of research is coming from places like Ethiopia and Brazil. And so just to give you a sense of what insights we were able to derive from authors, or Springer Nature was able to derive from authors about their voluntary use of InReview. And not surprisingly, most people cite the ability to track the manuscript. This is sort of a game changer for authors who've long been in the dark about the specific status of their manuscript in the editorial process. But they also cite the ability to get feedback from the wider community much earlier, and the ability to cite the preprint long before they would be able to for publication. And I like these quotes here because they really reflect this sort of sea change in in researchers' mentality around preprints and how they're becoming a natural part of the publication process, which of course makes us very happy to see. And so what's next for InReview? Well, aside from continuing to scale the rollout to more journals in the Springer Nature portfolio, we're in talks with other small publishers about offering this to their authors. We do want to diversify our journal portfolio. And of course, we have an unrealistically aggressive and long roadmap of enhancements that we'd like to make to the author dashboard. And while preprinting and the timeline have been at the core of the service so far, the long-term vision is to really see InReview as an entry point to a staging ground for authors, a place where they can access a suite of tools, both free and paid, and that are targeted and tailored to meet the specific goals of each author. So practically what this looks like is better support for ex-InReview authors, people who have not managed to publish in the journal that they were aiming for, but are now part of the broader Research Square platform. And this is things like, obviously, easy resubmission to a journal, free tools, and then targeted paid services, and validation in place through efforts like badges. And one example of this that I'm just featuring here, even though it's very early and in beta at the moment, is our language assessment tool and automated language correction tools. And this is something that that is a natural progression for us as being at our core and at our heart a language editing service. This was a natural place to start with AI-based tools, a way to give authors some insight into their manuscript and where it falls as it's coming into our platform, and various options that we can offer to authors to improve that and help their chances and help level the playing field for researchers who really haven't had a fair shake, because English is, of course, the lingua franca of modern science. And so this is where we are, and that's all I have for you today. And if you're interested in learning more, of course, you can find me via email or Twitter. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. And we're going to move over to Josh at Cite.
Great. So thanks to the other presenters. I think really great talks, encouraging to see so much progress. I kind of wish I was writing more papers so I could actually experience a lot of it. Today, I want to talk to you guys about our work at Cite, which I think continues this vein of trying to improve how research is done, communicated, and disseminated. I put my email address at the bottom, as well as our Twitter and then my personal Twitter. So if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to me. So as you might have guessed from the name of the company, we are focused on citations. Citations are a crucial, part of scholarly infrastructure. And I think, they have a lot of different meanings. And so they not only connect ideas through time and space, so the prediction of gravitational waves in 1915 from Albert Einstein to the detection of them in 2016 from CERN, but they're also used to measure researchers, journals, institutions, and really used as a metric. And there's this paper that came out actually earlier this month called CREAM, or Citations Rule Everything Around Me, with a nod to the Wu-Tang Clan, if anyone's familiar. And I really enjoy this paper, not only because of this fun title, but because I think it's pretty brutally honest with how citations are viewed by many in the community. And that is that they are a measure of academic prosperity. They're almost like a commodity, right? The more citations you have as a journal, the better. The more citations you have as an author, the better. However, when and why does one academic cite another can be hard to parse from these numbers. And I think that is really kind of crucially what we're doing at Cite, is going from how many to how something has been cited, and really focusing, more on the context of citations as opposed to the simple count of them. And so the way that I like to show Cite is to show the world as it exists without Cite, and then to show it through the lens of Cite. And so this is my actual PhD research. I was looking at chromosome segregation defects in human cells. I ultimately published it in eLife. I did my PhD in Virginia Tech. We collaborated with the hospital in Portugal, as well as a lab at the NIH. It's been cited 43 times and then viewed roughly 6,400 times, a number that I am slowly gaming up every time I give demos, which is now weekly. If you look at this metrics number, 43 or 6,400, or even if there's an altmetric score, I would argue in many cases this is used primarily by researchers as just a number. The higher, the better. The lower, maybe not so good. If you click through on this number, you might see something like this. So you'll see a list of citation, or a list of titles, citations. You can go read through these 43 different studies to see what are they saying about my work. But I would argue that this is a massive undertaking for 43 documents, for a dozen documents, let alone hundreds or thousands where some citations or some papers have. And so what we want to do is really kind of transform how citations are used. And so not just a way to measure and evaluate research from a bibliometric perspective, but to really kind of unlock the information that's contained within these publications, but make it digestible so that people can, understand what 43 different studies are saying without having to read all 43 different studies. And so if you look at the same article, so my article Under the Lens of Cite, you can see that we have basically the same metadata up top, so the title, the journal, the authors, the abstract, and then where it starts to get more interesting is that we show, not only the titles of the citing articles, but we also show the context, so this little excerpt of text. So this first one is classified as mentioning, simply because they're repeating what I found in my results. They're not indicating that they supported it or that they disputed it with evidence. It's really just referring to it. If you select for supporting, and this is a nice story for me to tell, and I can tell you from the author's perspective, helping authors show that they have received supporting citations is something that they'll love, and something that I think will be increasingly important for tenure and promotion and funding decisions as well, especially in the climate of irreproducible research and this massive onslaught of research that we're having now and will continue to have in the future. And so if you look at these two supporting citations, you look at the first one, you can see why we classify it as such. So it says in agreement with previous work, and then it cites me, Nicholson et al. The trisoma clones showed similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent, supplemental figure S2B. And the second one, if you skip down to the bottom, it says down in figure 2E and F, RPE plus 18 cells displayed a significant increase in chromosome misaggregation rates. So again, very similar to what I found. And so we go from somewhere looking at very superficial levels of kind of quality and impact to, in a few clicks, in a matter of minutes, being able to say, here's two independent studies that have supported this paper of interest that I'm in. And I think this is extremely powerful. And I think researchers may have this in their own field. So I knew what was being supported or contradicted within my very narrow discipline of chromosome segregation, aneuploidy, and cancer research. But if I stepped outside of that, I wouldn't know that, and I wouldn't be able to dig through all these citations. And so we're kind of trying to surface what is already out there and to try to make it more digestible. And our hopes is by explicitly showing supporting citations as well as disputing citations, this will encourage better behavior. So maybe people will be incentivized to share their data. If it will help others support them, they will share their code for similar reasons. Maybe they will include that one experiment that they're leaving out because that will matter much more than just trying to create a fancy narrative to get into a highly selective journal. Really, really trying to kind of incentivize good, reliable work, not just impactful work per se. And so this doesn't just have an impact on scholarly articles, and I think that's one thing that is really great about working in this space. Is like research informs kind of everything we do. It's not just about cancer research, it's about sociology, psychology, technology, and the list could go on. And it is through this research that we get better products, we get better policies, we learn to stand up straight during talks, things like this. And so this next example that I'm going to show you is taken from Wikipedia. We did a very quick analysis, basically, of looking at all scientific articles referenced in Wikipedia to see how they were being cited. Were there references that were being disputed, that was being prominently displayed on Wikipedia, and could that change really how the public or researchers interact with it? And so one of these examples really stood out to me, and that is on the Suicide and Internet Wikipedia page. And so just as a reminder, Wikipedia is, I think, the 10th most visited website in the world. I would say it's largely a kind of, first stop for many people looking on new topics, and oftentimes the only stop. And part of Wikipedia is, reference needed. And so that's a very important part that all these great editors do, is making sure that they're establishing references to support the claims on these pages. And I think that's as good as scientific articles are currently doing. And so that's what we have, but how could we make them better? So if you look at this page, I would say this is arguably a very meaningful page, right? If you're looking at suicide in the internet and you're coming to Wikipedia, maybe you're having these feelings yourself or someone in your family and you're looking for advice on what to do, you might see this sentence. And so this sentence says, a survey has found that suicide risk individuals who went online for suicide-related purposes compared with online users who did not, reported greater suicide risk symptoms, were less likely to seek help, and perceived less social support. And so that is indicating if you come on to the internet and you feel this way, you are maybe less likely to go seek help. And so that can have meaningful impact on how you react in this situation or advice that you give. And so reference number one better be reliable. And so how do we check that? Well, in today's world, you can click through and you will see, again, the same things that we see. So the number of views, which to me is miraculously low for such a popular website, arguing that most people are not even clicking through with this. There are 59 citations, but again, if you click through these citations, it's going to be a list of 59 articles, and I would say most people are not going through there. And then there's an altmetric score, which will show you the social media activity, but doesn't necessarily indicate how has this been received by other literature. Has it been supported? Has it been tested? Has it been contradicted? And so if you look at this through the lens of Cite, you can see that it has been supported 2 different times. The one thing, and sorry I can't hover over this because it's not a live demo, is that it's actually the same author supporting their previous work. If you look at the contradicting study, you can see that it says Harris et al. Also investigated help seeking, and in contrast to our study, they found similar levels of mental health. And this is not as clear as saying this is a totally wrong study, you should not follow it. But if you click through this, and that is the intent of Cite, is to not just replace reading articles with reading snippets, but to highlight the articles that you should go deeper on. You'll come through and see this snippet that says our findings suggest that those who report suicide or self-harm related internet use were actually more likely to have sought professional help for self-harm suicidal thoughts than those without. And so this is pretty much 180 from what is being reported on, I would say, a highly meaningful, impactful and visited website on the internet. And we think that information's out there. We just want to surface it better so that humans can look at research and digest it in a better way. And so we've heard from the last 2 presentations, and clearly we're all familiar with them at this stage. What about preprints? And so preprints are exploding right now. The amount of research on COVID, from when it's first posted or even before it's posted on a preprint to the time it's in the press or coming out of the President of the United States' mouth is very quick. And that can have pretty disastrous consequences. It can have pretty amazing consequences as well, right? It can greatly accelerate research, collaborations and things, but we want to be careful about this. And so if you come to this article, which is on medRxiv, it's looking at this cytokine profiles basically between severe and non-severe COVID. Is this something that I can trust, right? Is this something that has been tested by others? What have people said about it? Has it been cited at all? And so medRxiv does not show citations. They do show under metrics the number of times it's been downloaded, read, and tweets, but they're not showing what are other preprints saying about this or what are articles saying about this. And so if you look at this through the lens of Cite, I think there's a few things that are really interesting here to point out that was even interesting and kind of surprising to us at Cite. One is that we are collecting citations from preprints to other preprints, and they're happening extremely fast. And so this article came out on February 22nd. It was then supported by another preprint that says, in accordance with Juan and Lou's study, this study also found that the levels of IL-6 and IL-10 were associated with the severity of COVID-19 pneumonia. This came out only 5 days later. And so citations have historically had this long lag where it's been months or years. And I think that's true still to most. But as we move into preprints, I think this lag will come down, and being able to kind of assess what are different papers saying to each other and about each other, I think will become increasingly more important. And so this is not just, a tool, just as citations are not just a tool to look at the article level. We can also look at this at the journal level and the reference level as well. And so we are now, rolling out these smart citations, which is what we're calling them, on various articles in partnership with journals. We're displaying that in the metrics section alongside other citation indices in the reference section. And then we're also even providing a reference screen that we'll be releasing very soon, which checks references of manuscripts. So are you building your research atop something that has been disputed strongly, and are you aware of it? And if you are, maybe you want to address it, or even are you referencing something that has been retracted? And so we now have the capability that we can allow authors to upload an unpublished manuscript to check if their references are reliable, and that can clearly tie into submissions to make sure, again, that the foundations of these research is what they believe them to be. We've just launched, literally as of last night at probably about 9, which is probably not the best time to tweet new news, journal dashboards, because I think, Cite sits on this massive amount of information. We've analyzed over 16 million articles. That's over 600 million citation snippets, and we're growing, millions of citations per day still. We can help publishers, utilize this information to not only better understand their editorial processes, their business processes, their marketing, but to really kind of help promote reliability and reproducibility as well in a very explicit way. So by showing the most supported article or the most disputed article, and allowing them to go deeper on, okay, how can we incentivize and reward work that is being independently supported, and how can we maybe change some processes when we're seeing work that is shown to be wrong, if it's shown to be wrong in different ways. And so I kind of like to conclude a lot of my talks on this quotation from Eugene Garfield, because I think, we've thought this was something entirely novel that we thought of, but I think the idea has been around there for quite a while. And there's a paper, by Eugene Garfield in 1964 that talks about automating citation indices. And in that paper, he talks about these markers, and these markers are effectively our classifications. So he says these markers would appear in the published citation index along with the usual citation. So in the case of the paragraph above, for example, critique, or one of the several other terse statements like Mr. X is wrong, data spurious, or my favorite, calamity for mankind. And so I think, you can clearly have markers that are negative in this sense, but you can also have them in a positive way. Has this been supported? And I would say, our classifications of supporting or disputing with evidence, is our first stab at that. There's other ways that you can do this, and the way that I really look at it is, research is not just meant to be put up and shared as a trophy, but we can build atop of it, we can synthesize new ideas, and we can understand it in better ways if we can actually handle that volume of text and synthesize it in a way. And I think Cite has shown, one use case of that. And there's other groups doing really interesting things with images, with citations themselves. and then with other key parts of the metadata, and really kind of software eating scientific articles. And so I'll conclude there. And again, really remind everyone, very happy for questions and feedback. We listen and we make changes quite rapidly because we are a small organization and have the luxury of doing that. So feel free to email me or reach out on Twitter, if you will. And thanks.
Thanks, Josh. I'd like to go ahead and invite all the other speakers to come back with their cameras on. I think we have time for a question or two. There's everybody. So, Sammy, I think this first question, we should start off with you because I think you were the only one who mentioned your business model and potentially finding new revenue streams. So I was hoping all of you could potentially talk about what your business model is, what kind of your path to sustainability as a service or a product is as well. Sammy, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. So at the moment we're really focusing on societies, associations, and institutions that are organizing conferences and that really are in trouble with their conferences. And our business model really is relating to how much value we can create for the societies and institutions themselves. So essentially, it's a variable model. So we process these documents, and if the society and institution benefits from us working together with them, so that the value rises, we benefit as well. On a variable component. So this is kind of our model, and it works quite well so far. And just the support in these times is quite interesting to see.
Thanks. Michelle, what's Research Square's business model?
So I hinted at this a little bit with the services that we're offering to authors through their private dashboard on InReview, and indeed on the Research Square platform in general. And so this looks like the editing services that are already very well established, and that we know that there's a need for among the authors that are submitting preprints to get their paper into better shape before submitting for publication or even during the peer review process. And then there are some more experimental products in there, including these independent validation services and assessments that we're calling badges, that are essentially building on work that we've done for a long time for journals and assessing markers of reproducibility and reporting standards that are not often covered by peer reviewers as part of the standard peer review process, as a way of sort of standardizing those assessments across papers and making sure that that we're kind of putting them on the same level playing field. And then multimedia products, which we've already had some traction with, mostly through industry. This is something that we're very interested in, selling authors on to help them explain their research to broader audiences, and that includes things like lay summaries, infographics, and videos.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, so we're still quite early, and I would say we're figuring some of this out, but the overall model follows very much, similar models to other citation indices and alt metrics. And so we are providing advanced analytics and API access to publishers so that they can look at our data and utilize this, again, to enhance, how they disseminate their research, how they attract authors, how they improve their editorial processes. I think similarly to other citation indices, and especially as we roll out new kind of premium features, we will restrict various things to different tiers. So there will be a free access and then a premium access that we sell to universities, private R&D organizations, and things like this. And so we want to be, as open as we possibly can, but at the same time not so open that there's no business model there.
Thank you. So I think my last question before I ask if you all have questions for each other is how are you all measuring success? Is there some way your product or service, there's some way that you hope it will change, say, researcher behavior or market dynamics? Michelle, would you mind taking that first?
I mean, from my perspective, it's just seeing more of this shift that we've already been seeing to sharing early research and this open landscape that we've already been moving in the direction of, and that funders are starting to increasingly support, including preprints. And of course, you know, there is some movement in the direction of publication, then publishing, then validation, where you know you put the work up and you let the community speak to the value of the work, and it shifts a little bit from being a model where you know peer review happens with 1 to 3 reviewers in a very kind of closed way, and then you get this sort of stamp of validation that means different things at different journals. And you know, I think that this is the way that things will trend in the future, and we want to be positioned to support that if we can. So this is something that I think is going to happen with or without us. It's not something that we're necessarily pushing, but I think we're in a good position to be able to support authors who are interested in moving in that direction right now.
Thanks. Josh?
Yeah, so I think we're currently measuring the you know, success in adoption, right? Are people using this to better evaluate research? And that's, you know, at the researcher level, from researchers reading, and so are they using it on every paper they read? Is it helping them discover, you know, research? Is it helping them cite research more reliably? Things like this, and then also the adoption by publishers. And so we have some really big and interesting pilots rolling out this year, because I think, you know, Cite has been up until this stage kind of an interesting startup doing something over here. But as we get really involved in the scholarly infrastructure and, you know, start to be added to the real versions of record, I think that will really change. And I think once you kind of see citations in this light, it's really hard to go back. And my hope is that this has a shift to you know, not just chasing these 3 journals that we all need to get into, and we need to bend over backwards to get in there, but we start to reward people that go into research because they don't want to seek fame, but they want to like find and discover things. And I can tell you, you know, as a product of that system, I think there's a lot of disillusionment, right? You come into research thinking this is how it is done, and then you learn it's done in a different way. And so we want to kind of realign these things and say, hey, it's about doing good research, not the most flashy research. And so ultimately, you know, we do hope that this goes up to the funding levels, and, you know, organizations like the NIH and NSF start to utilize, you know, not just where something has been published or the H index of that, but then start to say, like, can others repeat or support this work, or are they being consistently, you know, shown to be wrong by others? And so I think this is a large and lofty goal of ours, but we're not in a rush, and we think it's, you know, very meaningful. And I think, you know, what's going on with COVID has really kind of clarified the utility of Cite, if anything, trying to understand what you can trust and not.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sammy. Yeah,
so you know, for us is quite clear, since we're in that acting in that hidden world. For us, is, you know, success would be unhiding all of what's hidden right now. So you know, I think the moment we can really trace back, right? I'm seeing always these sliders that you have kind of backwards and forward. You know, and a researcher, you know, from the idea of the first poster to the second poster to a presentation to whatever piece comes to it, until kind of the finally published paper, be it a preprint or publication, right? To showcase all of that process of 2, 3, 4 years. I think that's you know, that's going to be absolutely brilliant. And for us, that's really the measure of success. Can we actually make the entire process, let's say, more accessible, and can we connect the dots with one another? Yeah.
Thanks. And do you all have any questions for each other? It's okay if you don't. I'm putting you on the spot here. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, so sorry, I was muted and I didn't think I could unmute myself. So I mean, I think I would kind of just like to continue upon what Sammy just said, because I think it's really valuable, right? So Cite can analyze everything that's published, but there is so much that is not published, and it's not published for a lot of different reasons. Maybe it's not the correct format, maybe it's a poster, maybe you tried too many times and it just got rejected and you gave up. And I think it really is kind of this iceberg where there's a massive amount of information that isn't published. And you can even see that in our citation record. So if you look at the distribution of supporting and disputing citations versus mentioning, it's highly biased, right? There's about 94% of citations are mentioning, about 5% are supporting, less than 1% are disputing. And that doesn't mean that people don't find different conclusions. I think it means that they're not publishing them. And I think we want to change that incentive. And I think it's not just about like highlighting these and showing them. I think it's also providing them new forums to kind of communicate this. So a reason and a place to do it. And I think if we can do that, that's potentially very, very impactful, going beyond just like the canonical publication. So I just wanted to echo upon what he said.
I actually have maybe one small question, and it reflects a little bit the time that we're in, right? There's a lot of institutions, societies that are struggling, right? It's there's just a lot of parts in our industry that with quite some uncertainty. So I would love to understand from you guys, maybe to see how you see supporting institutions, societies, or just the ecosystem overall. From your end, because that's something that we on our end on Maurice here think a lot about how to support in exactly these times.
Yeah, I mean, I could take that as well. So I think, publishers and journals have always kind of been in this arms race to show that they're publishing the best work, reliable work, you can trust us, and that's continuing to happen, and that leads to new innovations like altmetrics, preprints, and all these different things. And I think that's overall a good trend that we're moving to. It opens up new challenges, though, just with every change. And I think that gets into, again, not just looking at impact. And I think all the things that we're kind of currently tracking is about impact per se, which is great. But what about like kind of the utility of it? Is it actually informing something, and are people using it beyond that? Or are they just reading it, and does it have kind of this superficial level? And so I think for us, there's been a lot of kind of approaches and attempts and initiatives to say, here's how we're going to stop or help reproducibility in science. And I think CITE is something that is simple to understand, not only by researchers but by administrators. And I think that's important because you need to have both understanding this as well as editors and publishers. And I think it's something easy to understand, and it's explicit. Right? Has this been supported? Has this been disputed? And I think, in the world of when you're watching a movie or Netflix, you go to Rotten Tomatoes, you can see what is the community saying about that. You can't do that easily in scientific articles, right? You can't see the peer reviews, they're hidden. And then the citations, it's like having to go read every single newspaper out there to figure out what the Netflix show is like. And so I really kind of like this analogy to Rotten Tomatoes. And I think with the volume increasing greatly of publications and that not slowing down, it's going to shift the problem from not showing just like impact, but to like, how do we find what we can trust and what we want to read, and what can we digest? Because we only have so much time, in the world and energy to actually read these things.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think preprints in particular have put this sort of self-correcting, iterative nature of science on full display in a way that it has never really been before. And everything is kind of sold as this neat process where, the publication gets peer reviewed, it gets the stamp of approval, and then it's a peer-reviewed publication, and it's kind of end of story. But anyone who is a scientist knows that it doesn't work that way at all. It's much more of an agile process than a waterfall process, and preprinting is more agile. It shows you the versions, it shows you that the story continues even beyond the publication, and that's why I think that we are so well primed for a shift in the industry in the way that we think about science in the scientific process, and it being actually reflected in the publication process. And I actually have a question for you, Josh. Sort of made me think of it when you were talking about sort of the value proposition of CITE. And I was thinking, you can think of Cite helping to understand the, how references are supported or disputed or mentioned for a publication. But is there a way to sort of, for any given article, give a holistic view of how, how that article stands because of its, like, is there a score that you can give holistically based on, what the corpus says about that article?
Yeah, so we've been kind of resistant to do that because I think, like, that boils what we're really trying to emphasize, like, here's what things say as opposed to just here's a number. And I think we actually started off with a score for articles, and we removed it based on, like, feedback from users, and because that's all they would see. They're like, oh, you're just measuring me, and that misses, I think, the point of Cite, and that's really, the context of how something's been received. With that said, we do have, a score at the journal level, and I think that's also more reliable because it's working with a much larger volume of citations. And what we're doing at the journal level is, basically, is this journal receiving more supporting citations and less contradicting citations than this one over here? And I think that can really change how you view an article, because or a journal, because there's some, journals with quite low impact factors, which maybe don't do well under the lens of the world today, but under the lens of Cite, they're like #1. And I think that is what we kind of want to promote, is these editors, these operations that are doing good work and are not necessarily being rewarded for it today. I don't know if, like, at the reference stage or at the manuscript stage, could you take the references and kind of like predict if this is going to be a good article or not? I think this is something I would personally love to study, and we constantly are doing, or sharing our data. Well, not constantly. We're sharing our data with researchers, because I do think, publications are so rich with information. If you can parse them up and utilize it at the scale that we have, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. And I think, we will start to see this out in collaboration with publishers when we roll out this reference screen to see, okay, does it help to show these disputing references? Is this like a time sink, or is it changing how people edit things? And I don't know, right? A lot of this stuff is so new to us, it's new to the community, that how we approach everything with publishers is as a pilot, right? Let's put this out there, let's see how it can help these different stakeholders. Here's how we think it can, but does it actually help that? And I think, again, I think we kind of want to emphasize, like, quality over quantity. And in my personal case, which is nice because I have supporting citations in this case, I think I can really feel it as a researcher, right? I don't care that I have 49 citations. I have 2 other groups supporting me. And I think that is a very powerful narrative that authors can use in their tenure packets, or if they're writing the grant and things like this. And so it's kind of empowering those that are maybe not rewarded under the current paradigms with a new paradigm.
Right. I'm also thinking about how this could be used for evaluating a review article, right? Because this is one of the issues with determining whether you can trust a review article, because they're building this narrative around a bunch of references. And if there was a way to sort of have a proxy for what those how good those references are, then you could also have a more objective sense of how good that review is.
So, I mean, there's definitely some things that we could do there. So the way that we tie into submission systems is to show high-level numbers. It'll say, here's how many references we parsed, here's the total number of citations, and that's just simply because submission systems won't give us more, like, real estate. And so we are showing, here's the 1,000 citations that these references have received, here's how many are supporting, here's how many are disputing and mentioning. And so you could clearly, like, compare some of these things, later on and do longer pilots. And I think this is the really kind of fascinating thing that I've seen from our data. Is, like, researchers are already starting to use it to answer questions. Another study that I think would be really interesting with our data is, does data availability statements, does that lead not only to a citation boost in impact, but does it lead to more supporting citations? So if you share your data, are others more likely to support you or dispute you, or what? And I think, like, Cite has that kind of power where there's this whole field of bibliometrics that's asked a lot of interesting questions and answered them, and we can take it, like, one step further. And so, again, like, if there's any researchers watching this, we're happy to share our data for these research purposes, but also with publishers as well. And I think, they look at these a lot internally, and that's really kind of what we're trying to help facilitate as well.
And just to add one more thing, I'm sorry, Will.
That's okay.
Sorry, one more thing, because I love that I love that discussion. And I think applying what has been discussed also to the very earliest stages, because in papers in poster presentations you'll find citations as well. I think to make everything from the very early on to the end quite transparent is something that we all should fight for, right?
Yeah.
Well, Sammy, Josh, Michelle, thank you all very much for participating in this SSP Virtual Library webinar. To the audience, we're looking forward to hearing from you in Q&A when this session is debuted. So I hope you all have a good day, and thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.